So thank you again. And then our last speaker today is Nancy Chanover. She's from New Mexico State University. We all know Nancy. She's going to be talking about the Apache Point Observatory Lunar Laser Ranging Station. So go ahead, Nancy. Oh, you're still muted, Nancy.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see my slides. Right, so I feel not terribly well equipped to give this talk because this is not my direct area of research, but I'm here to sort of provide you, sort of wearing my director's hat, provide you with an overview of kind of where we've been with the laser ranging efforts that have been going on from APO for quite some time, and also where we're going because we've undergone some changes recently that I wanted to share with you. So let's see. A lot of what I'm going to start with in terms of the history is probably well known to some of you. In fact, some of you were probably more involved in the establishment of this program than I ever was. And so I apologize to those of you for whom this is a review. But for the more newer or junior members of the audience, let me just sort of reintroduce you to the Apollo program as we've known it for quite some time. So we've been using the 3.5 meter telescope at APO for a lunar laser ranging project since 2006, pretty much continuously. And it's really been the premier facility within the continental United States to perform lunar laser ranging. This effort was led predominantly by Tom Murphy, who's at UC San Diego. And as many of you know, who have been scheduled on the telescope since 2006, we have these little bite-sized chunks of time that are devoted to the lunar laser ranging program, or known as Apollo. It's typically a 1-hour time slot. We typically schedule them at the start of A half, or at the end of B half, or at the transition between A and B to conduct these observations. The observations have been made predominantly by Russet McMillan. Again, many of you know Russet, the lead observing specialist on the 3.5 meter. And you know, with some oversight or what they call eavesdropping by the part of the UC San Diego team or the Apollo team. They're not just at UC San Diego. So, you know, I think probably you can either you've seen firsthand or you can gather what this kind of effort entails. Basically, we're using the 3.5 meter telescope to project a laser out into space. It then hits a very specific location on the moon, is reflected by a corner cube reflector that was left behind on the surface by previous spacecraft or astronauts, and then we measure the return signal. And so that sounds pretty simple. There's a lot of reasons why that's hard. And this cartoon from a review paper that Tom Murphy wrote really illustrates, you know, kind of one of the biggest problems or challenges, right? So you have a beam that you're sending out through the telescope, a laser beam with, you know, 10 to the 17 photons, right? So you have a huge number of photons going out. But the beam diverges as it leaves the telescope and travels through the Earth's atmosphere. And so by the time it reaches the moon, it's like 2 kilometers in size. And then it has to hit the retroreflector. Some photons hit the retroreflector and get reflected back. There's also a divergence on the return signal imparted by the retroreflector itself. And so the beam, as it returns back to Earth, or the footprint, is like 15 kilometers. Okay, so the likelihood of capturing those photons is quite small. And, you know, it's just a really challenging measurement to make. Having said that, you know, I think it's been an unbelievable feat of engineering to say that we can now routinely measure the range or the distance, the Earth-Moon distance, to a millimeter, right? The moon's distance varies, and I put these numbers here on purpose, right? It goes between 356,500 to 406,700 kilometers. And we're getting it to within a millimeter. Okay, so that's really, really amazing. And it's been, you know, a really fundamental tool that has been used, and I'll talk about the motivation for it in a second, for a number of different types of investigations. These are what the retroreflectors look like on the moon. So there are 5 of them. There are 3 that were left behind by Apollo astronauts from the Apollo 11, 14, and 15 missions. And there are 2 that are on Lunokhod rovers, which were left behind by the Soviet Luna 17 and 21 missions. And so their locations are shown on the map on the bottom left. They are typically structured in an array of these things. So there's sort of a collection of them. And if you've ever been to APO and to the Visitor Center, the Astronomy and Sunspot Visitor Center, you've seen a mock-up of those retroreflectors there as well. And then there's some photographs of what they actually look like on the right side, bottom right. So again, for those of you who have been to APO or who are at APO right now, you know quite well what this looks like, but this is to refresh the memories of some who haven't been there for quite some time. So the Apollo hardware is mounted on the back of the telescope. So I'm not sure if you see my cursor, but anyway, here it is, and the associated electronics box is over here. And you know, there are people here at this meeting who could talk a lot about what's inside of these boxes. But the schematic on the right is really intended just to show kind of a high level overview of what's happening. So the laser is in here. There's a lot of electronics on the accompanying rack over here. Then in the intermediate level below that, there's some more electronics and chillers and those sorts of things. And so it's a permanently mounted fixture. So it's not that it comes on and off the telescope, but it's there all the time. And as I mentioned, is there observing quite regularly throughout the calendar year. So why do this? Why go through the trouble of doing this very challenging measurement, which I'm sure I didn't even adequately convey how challenging it is. But anyway, there's a number of good reasons why we want to do laser ranging. In short, all of the measurement provides a number of different tests of gravity. Okay, so it provides a test of something called the strong equivalence principle. And I can try to answer that later if people want to know more about that. Turns out the gravitational constant G, which we just assume is constant G, actually changes with time a little bit. And this helps make that figure out how much it's changing. It provides tests of the gravitomagnetism, so the interactions between gravity and magnetism. It helps test the fidelity of the inverse square law, which again, we sort of assume to be something pretty fundamental and unchanging. And it provides a number of tests of the Earth-Moon gravity and gravity environment, as well as the moon's interior and Earth geodesy. Okay, so it provides tests of gravity in many different forms. What you see on the right is sort of a schematic of these lunar laser ranging measurements. And so everything in this diagram is moving through the solar system barycenter frame of reference. And so on the Earth line, which is shown here, at some time tau1, the signal is emitted. It reaches the moon at time t2, and it returns back to Earth and is measured at time tau2. And then, you know, we're doing this accurate time of flight calculation and adjusting everything into the appropriate reference frame to get a very, very accurate measurement of that time of flight. One thing I wanted to mention quickly is that the Apollo measurements have been utilized for science even as recently as a few weeks ago. So this is a paper that appeared in JGR Planets, I think literally in June. And it was a measurement, it was a result that basically they used the Apollo measurements over the 14 years that the experiment's been conducted to determine whether the distances between the retroreflectors has changed at all, which would be indicative of plate motions on the moon. It's not expected that moon has plate tectonics because it's thought to be geologically dead, but and that was confirmed by this measurement or these results showing that it's not moving to within like 4 millimeters, and the distances are like 1,200 kilometers. Geodesy is something I wanted to touch on briefly because that's sort of bringing us into this new chapter for Apollo for the lunar laser ranging experiment at APO. So just to be clear what geodesy is, because it's something that I have heard a lot about, but I never really know how to define it. It's basically the measurement of 3 different aspects of the Earth. It's the measurement of its gravitational field, its geometric shape, and its orientation in space, and how all three of those things change over time, and then applying those same properties or learning about those same properties for potentially other bodies in the solar system as well. So that's really geodesy. So starting this year, the Apache Point Observatory Lunar Laser Ranging Station became part of the NASA Space Geodesy Network. Okay, so we kind of changed our branding a little bit, but we're still doing the same types of measurements, but under a different umbrella. So I want to talk a little bit about why NASA is interested in this pursuit. So this is a couple of these slides are provided to me by the NASA, the new lead for the investigation, which is Stephen Merkowitz, who's the head of the Space Geodesy program at NASA. And really this is what we're talking about here is we're making kind of fundamental measurements, this Earth-Moon distance, which is kind of down here in the bottom in terms of the infrastructure measurements that we're making. And what you see at the top is kind of what that can lead you to and why NASA is interested in geodetic and geodesy measurements. This is an example of, again, I said you need to know the Earth's shape, you need to know its gravity, you need to know its position in space. And that has implications as far as NASA is concerned for lots of different things that NASA is involved in: Earth observing, Earth orbiting satellites, other weather monitoring, climate change, power surges, solar activity, all of these things. So geodesy is a really important effort on NASA's docket. Lunar laser ranging is just one small component of the types of measurements that are made in NASA's geodesy program. They have a program with lots of different types of measurements, and those are listed here. I can explain them in more detail or try to if people have questions, but the point is now lunar laser ranging is kind of just one component of a larger program for these geodetic measurements. And so these are the stations that are used for laser for the Space Geodesy Network. And you can see APO listed here. I see the color is red, so I'll try to wrap up here in a moment. And more importantly, for the laser ranging, international laser ranging, APO is the only facility based in the United States that is continuing to do lunar laser ranging. And the reason why that's important is because NASA has a renewed interest in the moon through the Artemis program. And they will be launching some new retroreflectors to the moon in the next calendar or next year and a half, I think. And so there's a very strong interest on NASA's part to be able to retain a lunar laser ranging facility in the US that can provide improved measurements, so that those retroreflectors can also be used for navigation of satellites in orbit around the moon. So I will stop there. We're kind of in the middle of this transition. So during a pandemic, it's really hard for people to get together and transfer knowledge. So we're just now coming out of that and being able to start learning from the different teams, sharing knowledge, and we're going to see kind of where this takes us over the next few years. But NASA is very excited to be part of the APO family. And that's what I'll stop for now. And if people have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Awesome. That was fascinating. Thank you, Nancy. Are there any questions? I had one, Nancy. What are the major sources of errors that you have to beat down to get into millimeter certainties?
So some of it is the, I think it's the detection system, which is a series of avalanche photodiodes for detecting the signal. Some of it is so you have to sort of back out the other known motions that you're trying to correct for. So things like the libration of the moon and Jupiter's gravitational influence. So it's kind of just all of these gravitational influences that have to be folded in order to take that out.
Okay. Just, yeah.
What we're gaining from the 3.5 meter, and the reason why we're able to do this millimeter precision is because we have the aperture, so that basically we're collecting more photons at a faster cadence.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Nancy. And Thank you to all of our speakers for this session, and we've got a short break and then we'll meet back again at 11:15. So we'll see you all in about 10 or so minutes.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.